They installed a camera on his property without his consent, invading the one place he thought was truly his own backyard. The HOA claimed it was for security, but Jack Thompson knew better. It was about power, control. Karen Matthews, the HOA president, smirked as she dismissed his concerns, her voice dripping with arrogance. "If you've got nothing to hide, Jack, you shouldn't be worried." That was the moment he realized she didn't just want compliance. She wanted submission. She had turned his home into her surveillance state, watching his every move, intruding on his family's privacy. When he tried to fight back, she humiliated him at the HOA meeting, accusing him of being paranoid, defiant, uncooperative. She fined him for tampering with security equipment when his gazebo umbrella blocked the camera's view. It was a blatant abuse of power, and Karen wielded it mercilessly, daring him to resist. But Karen didn't know who she was dealing with. She thought Jack was just another homeowner she could intimidate into silence. She had no idea that he was already gathering evidence, that his neighbors were quietly rallying behind him. Jack Thompson loved his backyard. It was his sanctuary, a place of laughter, family barbecues, and quiet Sunday mornings with his wife, Emma. Their children played under the shade of the tall oak tree, their giggles echoing through the neighborhood. It was a place of memories, peace, and privacy. Or at least, it used to be. One evening, as Jack was watering the roses Emma had planted, something caught his eye. A faint glimmer, high up on the oak tree. Squinting, he stepped closer, his heart sinking as he realized what it was. A camera. Not just any camera. It was a surveillance camera, positioned to watch his entire backyard. Its lens reflected the golden light of the setting sun, blinking red with every recording. A chill ran down Jack's spine. Who would do this? And why? His mind raced, recalling the recent HOA newsletter mentioning increased security measures, but nothing about cameras on private property. It felt invasive, wrong. His sanctuary was no longer his own. Fury ignited in his chest. Without hesitation, Jack stormed to the HOA office, his footsteps heavy with anger. He flung open the door to find Karen Matthews, the HOA president, sitting smugly behind her desk. Karen was known throughout the neighborhood as a control freak, a woman who thrived on power and manipulation. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight, her eyes cold and calculating. She looked up, unfazed by Jack's presence. "Karen?" Jack's voice was low, strained with barely controlled rage. "Why is there a camera on my property?" Karen's lips curled into a condescending smile, her fingers tapping rhythmically on her desk. "Security purposes, Jack. It's for the safety of the community." Jack's fists clenched. "On my land? Pointed at my backyard? That's not security, Karen. That's spying. You had no right." Karen's smile faded, her eyes narrowing as she leaned back in her chair. "HOA has the right to install cameras wherever necessary. It's in the bylaws." Her tone was cold, authoritative. She wasn't backing down. Jack had read those bylaws, memorized them even, and nowhere did it say the HOA could violate his privacy like this. But Karen was clever. She knew how to twist words and bend rules to suit her agenda. Worse, she knew how to make people submit. He took a step closer, his voice trembling with anger. "You crossed a line, Karen. You had no right to do this." Karen stood up, crossing her arms as she met his gaze. Her voice was calm, almost mocking. "I suggest you learn to live with it, Jack. It's for your own good." Jack's jaw tightened as he glared at her, his hands trembling with frustration. He wanted to shout, to rip the camera down with his bare hands. But he knew Karen wouldn't listen. She never did. That night, Jack sat on his porch, his eyes locked on the blinking red light in the tree. It felt like an intrusion, a violation of everything his backyard stood for. His chest tightened with anger and helplessness. How could one woman have so much power? Emma joined him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "This isn't right, Jack. Our kids play out there. That woman is watching us." Jack's fists clenched, his jaw tightening as he whispered, "I won't let her get away with this." He looked back at the camera, its lens cold and unblinking, a constant reminder of Karen's control. A fire ignited within him. He wouldn't back down. Not this time. Karen had crossed a line, and Jack was determined to fight back. Jack knew he couldn't fight Karen alone. She was too powerful, too manipulative, and too entrenched in the HOA's bureaucracy. But he also knew he wasn't the only one suffering under her rule. Determined to expose her tyranny, he began reaching out to his neighbors one by one, whispering through fences, catching them at mailboxes, and inviting them over for coffee. It started in his garage, the one place he knew Karen's cameras couldn't reach. The air was heavy with anxiety as neighbors shuffled in, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting Karen to appear at any moment. Faces were pale, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched with fear. But as they began to share their stories, fear turned to anger, and anger turned to resolve. Lisa was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "She fined me $500 for my garden hose. It was behind my fence. She said it was unsightly. I was too scared to fight back." Her eyes were glossy with shame, but Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Lisa. She's been doing this to all of us." Others began to chime in, voices growing louder with each confession. Unjust fines, threats of legal action, public shaming in HOA newsletters. It was a pattern of abuse, a reign of terror that Karen had used to control the entire neighborhood. Jack's chest tightened as he realized the extent of her power. She wasn't just targeting him, she was bullying the whole community. Together, they devised a plan. They would gather evidence, photos of cameras pointed into private yards, copies of unjust fines, and even recordings of Karen's confrontations. They were careful, quiet, methodical. Jack knew that if Karen found out, she would retaliate. But they were ready. They were no longer alone. The evidence was damning. Photos showed cameras aimed directly at bedroom windows and backyards, places no one had consented to be watched. Neighbors produced stacks of notices, each fine more absurd than the last. $300 for a mailbox that was too short, $450 for holiday lights left up too long. It was clear Karen was using the HOA as her personal weapon, but Jack needed more than evidence. He needed the law on his side. He consulted with a local attorney who confirmed his suspicions. Karen's surveillance was a direct violation of Colorado's privacy laws. Not only that, but the HOA bylaws she cited were outdated and didn't grant her the authority she claimed. Armed with this knowledge, Jack felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. Empowered and emboldened, Jack took the next step. He reached out to Rachel Collins, a local investigative journalist known for exposing corruption. When he showed her the evidence, her eyes widened, her pen scribbling furiously as she realized the magnitude of the story. "This could be huge, Jack. I'll make sure the whole city hears about this." Meanwhile, Karen was growing desperate. She wasn't stupid. She sensed the shift in the neighborhood's loyalty, felt her power slipping away. In a panicked attempt to regain control, she doubled down on her intimidation tactics. More fines arrived at Jack's door, each one more ludicrous than the last. She spread rumors that Jack was a troublemaker, even insinuating he was dangerous. But the community didn't believe her lies anymore. They stood behind Jack, united in their defiance. The news story aired on a Friday evening, and it was brutal. Rachel's report painted a vivid picture of Karen's tyranny, with footage of the invasive cameras, testimonies from neighbors, and a damning interview with Jack. As the camera zoomed in on one of the blinking red lights, Rachel's voice echoed through the television. Is this security or surveillance gone too far? Residents demand answers. Karen's name was dragged through the mud, her face plastered across the evening news. The once untouchable queen of the HOA was now exposed as a bully and a fraud. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, people gathering in driveways to watch the story unfold. For the first time, they saw Karen for who she really was. But Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. The very next day, she showed up at Jack's doorstep, her face twisted with rage, her hands shaking. "You think this is over?" she spat, her voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Jack didn't flinch. He met her glare head-on, his voice calm and steady. "Neither do you." He watched as her face paled, her confidence wavering for the first time. She turned on her heel and marched away, but Jack knew she wasn't done. Not yet. But now, he wasn't afraid. He had his neighbors, his evidence, and the law on his side. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, Jack felt like he could win. Karen had underestimated him, underestimated all of them. And now, her empire was crumbling. The courtroom was packed, tension crackling in the air. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on Karen. She looked confident, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, her chin held high. But Jack could see through her facade. Behind that smug smile, she was nervous, and she had every reason to be. Karen had filed a lawsuit against Jack for defamation, claiming his public accusations ruined her reputation. She demanded a public apology and a hefty sum for damages. But Jack wasn't intimidated. Armed with undeniable evidence and the unwavering support of his neighbors, he countersued, charging her with invasion of privacy and abuse of power as HOA president. It was his turn to fight back. Karen's attorney spoke first, painting her as a dedicated community leader merely doing her duty. "The cameras were for security, nothing more, nothing less," he argued, his voice smooth, his demeanor calculated. He emphasized her good intentions, describing Jack's accusations as baseless and malicious. "She was ensuring the safety of all residents. Isn't that what any responsible leader would do?" Jack's fists tightened under the table, his blood boiling at the manipulation. But he remained composed, his attorney rising to his defense with calm authority. "This case isn't about security. It's about control." He turned to the judge, his voice firm. "Karen Matthews violated state privacy laws. She placed cameras on private property without consent, invading the sanctity of Jack's home." The evidence was damning. Photos of cameras aimed at bedroom windows, videos of Karen's confrontations, and stacks of absurd fines showed her abuse of power. But the most devastating blow came when Jack's attorney revealed the smoking gun, a leaked email from Karen to the HOA board. It read, "We need to make an example out of Jack. If he falls in line, the others will too." The courtroom fell silent. Karen's face turned pale, her confident posture crumbling. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked small, exposed, powerless. The judge's gaze hardened as he read the email aloud, his voice echoing in the stunned room. Jack watched as Karen's world collapsed around her. Her lies unraveled, her power disintegrated. His attorney's closing argument was sharp and unyielding. This was never about security. It was about power, manipulation, and control. No one should live under constant surveillance in their own home. The judge's gavel slammed down, his voice firm and final. "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Jack Thompson. The cameras were illegally installed and must be removed immediately. Furthermore, Karen Matthews is guilty of abusing her authority and is hereby removed from her position as HOA president. She is also ordered to pay damages for invasion of privacy." The courtroom erupted. Jack's neighbors cheered, hugging one another, their faces alight with relief and joy. The cameras came down that very evening, dismantled piece by piece, each removed lens a symbol of freedom reclaimed. Jack stood in his backyard, his sanctuary restored, his family's privacy protected once more. Emma embraced him tightly, tears of joy in her eyes. "You did it, Jack. You stood up to her. You stood up for all of us." He looked at the oak tree, the spot where that cursed camera once hung, and felt a wave of victory wash over him. "No one messes with my family's freedom," he whispered, his voice steady, his resolve unbreakable. Karen left the neighborhood shortly after, her empire shattered, her reputation in ruins. The HOA elected a new board, one that valued privacy, respected boundaries, and truly served the community. They even asked Jack to join, but he politely declined. He had fought his battle, and he had won. Now, all he wanted was peace. As Jack watched his kids play in the backyard, their laughter echoing through the air, he smiled. They were safe. They were free. And that was all that mattered. Justice had prevailed. The bully had fallen. And Jack Thompson proved that no one, not even the mightiest dictator, was above the law.